A big hello to everyone joining us today. I'm Arbaz Hashmi, and on behalf of MPOWER Financing, I welcome you all to our session, COVID-19 and O-1 Visa for International Students in the US. We chose this topic because US immigration has always been a mystery, and as an organization dedicated to serve international students, it made perfect sense to bring in experts to simplify the process. And speaking of these experts, we have three of them joining us today. Sara, Itukas, CEO and co-founder of LegalPad. We also have Jeet Goswami from her team joining us today. And don't worry, they will be introducing themselves properly. We also have Ifani from MPOWER team. She heads our Path to Success initiative, which aims at driving initiatives to help our borrowers succeed and she brings a very unique perspective to the table from the point of view of an international student. I would not take much time, but in the next 1 minute, I will explain the flow of the webinar. We have about 60 minutes with us today. The first half would be taken up by Sara, Jeet, and Ifani, and they'll go over the topic for the day. I trust and I know that they have prepared a deck for you guys, so they will be taking you through that. The next half would be all about your questions about the immigration. If O1, if you have any other question related to immigration about OPT or maybe H1B as well, feel free to ask. If there is time, we would love to address some of those questions as well. Also, during the course of the presentation, please don't hesitate in asking the questions. I will be getting in touch with you individually to let you know if we would be covering this question during the presentation or we'd be addressing this in the question and answers round. Right. So without taking too much of anybody's time, and I was given 2 minutes and I think I have done justice to them, Sara, I'm going to transfer the presentation rights to you so that you can kick this off.
Thanks so much, Arbaz. Hi, everyone. I'm Sara. I'm the COO and co-founder of LegalPad. And basically, my co-founder and I started LegalPad because we wanted to make it faster and easier for startup founders and aspiring startup founders, for a lot of you in the audience, to kind of understand what your work visa options are. So a little bit of background about us. Let me just share my screen and start the presentation real quick. So a little bit of background about us. We are a Techstars company. I'm a first-time founder myself. I'm also an immigrant. So, this is very much something that I'm very passionate about. So please, again, as Arbaz said, please don't hesitate to put your questions in the question section of the webinar. And we'll do our best to answer them for you over the course of the presentation. Awesome. So in the interest of making the most out of your Saturday morning, and again, we really appreciate you being here, I'll get started. So the presentation is in 2 parts. So in the first part, as you see in this deck, it's the O-1 visa for founders or aspiring startup founders. So we'll kind of go through the advantages of being on an O-1 visa, kind of the simple overview of what the criteria is, and a really high-level overview of what the process would be like, particularly if you pursue an O-1 visa with LegalPad. That being said, if there are any other questions that you don't see answered in this section, again, please put it in the questions box. And then the second part of the first 30 minutes, we're going to go through the immigration updates. So these are the 7 key updates about what's going on in terms of immigration policy and how it could potentially affect you. So we'll go over the 7 key updates and then kind of USCIS processing. And what we mean by that is, when you submit a visa petition to USCIS, similar to how a lot of you have submitted an I-765 for your work authorization, right? We'll talk about that. And then we'll also go over briefly kind of travel updates. And also for those of you that are currently working right now, just some I-9 updates that could potentially be affecting all of you. So the O-1 work visa. So the O-1 visa, a lot of you may have heard of it before. It's called the Extraordinary Ability or the Einstein visa, because typically it's actually something that people who have received like a Nobel Prize, or, you know, here's an example that I usually hate using, but, you know, Justin Bieber has an O-1 to the US. So one thing that we realize, though, is a lot of people who decide to go into entrepreneurship, they're actually qualified for the O-1 visa. And there are a lot of advantages over getting an O-1 versus, say, an H-1B, which, you know, the H-1B has been getting a lot of attention in the press lately. And we're here to kind of let you know that there are other options if you decide to start your company. So the O-1 visa, some of the advantages. So you may work for one company in the US for 3 years, and you can renew the visa indefinitely while you are in the US. Another great thing, though, too, is that the O-1 work visa is based on professional accomplishments. So for those of you who have already founded startups before, or have, you know, contributed original contributions to the field, I'll go over what that means in later slides. So the advantages: there is no lottery. So as many of you probably either heard from your school or have experienced yourselves, there is a lottery for the H-1B visa. And the O-1 does not have that kind of limitation. There's also no minimum salary. So you can pay yourself whatever you want because there is no minimum. The reason why I bring this up is because, you know, as a startup founder myself, I know that when you start a company, you often do not make a market salary for a while. That actually is not a problem when you are on an O-1, but could be an issue if you're on an H-1B. So that's just something to flag for everyone. The O-1 also leads to a green card really nicely. And the best part about the O-1, though, too, is that it leads to a green card process that's actually a faster wait time than it is for other green card processes. So I don't know how many of you know this, but, you know, the wait times for green cards have been increasing steadily, particularly with the rise of tech fields. And what the result of that is generally that if you are coming from any of the following countries, so like India, China, and the Philippines, the wait time for those green cards tends to be a lot longer than, say, people who are born in other countries. But with the O-1, it's a way faster waiting time, oftentimes even cut down by 10 years. It's also relatively easy to change employers. So you can transfer your O-1 similar to how you would transfer an H-1B visa. But the process is actually a lot quicker than it would be for an H-1B. There are no deadlines. So again, when you go to like thinking about how there's no lottery, there's no deadline either. So you can apply at any time. And there is no degree required if you do not have a university degree. But it doesn't hurt if you do, particularly when it comes to the green card process. It actually helps, it works in your favor to have a university degree. Oh, pardon. All right, and so the O-1 criteria. So if you are thinking of pursuing an O-1 visa, it requires that you meet at least 3 of the following 8 criteria, which I'll go over. So particularly if you've been through something called an accelerator program, and I'm happy to answer this in the Q&A section, because LegalPad has been through an accelerator program, and it's called TechStars. So if you've been through something like TechStars or Y Combinator, YC, or 500 startups, you almost always like pre-qualify because you meet at least 4 of those criteria. And more often than not, too, there are other criteria, particularly for you guys who are like international students. If you have a university degree or a master's, that can actually contribute in terms of like your thesis papers and things like that as well. So you have that added advantage. So if you're a post-accelerator founder, I'm just going to go over this really briefly. These are the 8 criteria that are listed right here. So I'm not going to list all of them right now, but if you are if you graduated from an accelerator program, you meet those first 4 highlighted with yellow. And particularly if you graduated from university with a master's, you have the opportunity to contribute to the scholarly articles area, and also original contributions if you have any patents. So awards. So as a Post Accelerator founder, what's really, you meet the awards criteria if you've received venture capital before. If you basically raise money from a VC, a venture capital fund, then you qualify for this. If you have not received venture capital before, there are other ways to receive awards. So, if anyone here has been on Forbes Under 30 or has been recognized by an industry award, then you certainly could qualify. The only caveat here, though, it cannot be an award from your university, because this needs to reflect your accomplishments as a professional and not a student. In terms of membership, so participating in an accelerator definitely counts. Like I said, if you've been accepted to Techstars or to 500 or to YC, the acceptance rates, I believe, are around the 1 to 5% area, which means that you have been selected to be a part of an elite group of people. Another thing, though, too, it's not just accelerator programs. So if you have been accepted into other organizations that require excellence in the field. So like IEEE, for example, for those of you vision engineers out there, if you've been accepted to a certain tier where you're actually reviewing papers and also reviewing membership, people that come into the membership program, that would certainly count. Critical employment. So if you founded a venture-backed startup company, you are a founder. That means you are critical to the success of the company. Additionally, if you're an early employee at a company as well, and you have sizable equity in the company, or you are, let's say, going with the IEEE example, if you are a vision engineer that's integral to the technology required for the success of the company. So if self-driving cars, for example, if you're one of the early engineers on that, then you would consider to be a critical employee. High remuneration. So owning a venture-backed startup, this certainly helps. And again, like I mentioned earlier in the critical employment piece, if you are also given a sizable amount of equity, then you meet this criterion, because part of the high remuneration piece is that you need to get paid higher than most people in your industry. And your equity can reflect that. So if you own, let's say, like even half of, like, let's say like 3% of a startup that's worth, let's say like $80 million, and that 3% of the 80 million would actually be counted as part of the high remuneration piece. Press. So if you have received any articles about your work, this is super helpful, but it needs to be international or nationally recognized press. So things like Forbes or things like, again, IEEE too, like that helps, because it's like articles that are spread that kind of showcase that you are extraordinary, which we all know you are, and that the whole world knows it, and they asked you to be featured in press. Another caveat again is that this needs to be press about your professional work. So it can't be, student competitions or anything like that. It needs to be your work as a professional. Scholarly articles. So this is where a lot of you could thrive. So articles that you have published for trade publications or through your school, then you could meet this criterion. This is actually one of the exceptions to the whole professional accomplishments piece, is that if you've written scholarly articles, if they've been peer reviewed, published, and also if a lot of people have cited your work, then that could certainly be helpful. Judging, so startup competitions. Unfortunately, the caveat exists here again. What does not count is if you've judged startup competitions for your university. However, if you are a judge at a hackathon that's not affiliated with your university and you were asked to be a judge because of your skill set, then this certainly counts. And another piece too is if you have peer reviewed other people's journals that have been published, that counts and meets the judging criterion. Original contributions. So inventions, patents, original technology. Like, is there anything that you have created that is particularly, original? I think particularly during the times of COVID, which, comes with its own set of problems, as I don't need to tell everyone here, as immigrants for sure, with all these new updates, which we'll go over later, by the way. Original contributions has become more important now than ever, because it is in the national interest to keep international talent and also innovators like you in the US. So don't be shy, like really take the time and like be proud of all of your accomplishments, because that's really just gonna help you during the kind of like visa petition process. And speaking of process, like there is a pretty straightforward path. So basically, and we'll share this with you after the webinar, but you can hop on a call with us to make sure you can qualify for the O-1. And you can sign up using office hours, which we'll send out. There's a link to speak to someone on our team. Also, after we do the screening, we'll onboard you and then do we'll ask for documents that can be used as evidence for the 8 criteria listed here, depending on what it is. And usually that evidence includes, like reference letters from people who know your work and have seen you, like can speak to the extraordinariness that is you. And yeah, we just need to have that evidence. Also the names of the people that will be signing your letters. And we also give you tips on how to approach that as well, because we've done this multiple times. And then once everything is put together, we'll do a final review. And then, we'll put everything together, get an attorney to sign everything. And yeah, we'll finalize the application and submit it for you, USCIS. The great thing about the O-1, which is different from if you, say are applying for an H-1B for the first time, is that you can pay for the government to speed up the government processing time. Now you can do this with the H-1B. However, if you're getting an H-1B for the first time, you won't be able to start until October 1st of the year, every year. But with the O-1, basically it takes around 15 days for the government to make a final decision on your case. And you can get started essentially as soon as the approval is issued. So what now? So a lot of you, and I sympathize too, probably looked at this presentation and were like, wow, that's a lot of stuff that I need to take care of. So while you may not be qualified for the O-1 now, there are certain steps that you can take in order to kind of set yourself up for success there. The first thing is, if you're a startup founder, get funded. Once you get funded, you hit like 3 to 5 of the criteria are automatically. That being said, there are people who decide to bootstrap their companies, which, by the way, very admirable and awesome. So, another thing that you could do is, press. If you're publicizing not just about your raise, but also if you started a company and you created something awesome, it's like try to get it published with someone. Try to get it published so that way the world knows about your work. We have some providers at LegalPad that could potentially facilitate this. So if you do reach out to us, that's something that we can refer you to a provider essentially. And then judging. For those of you in the tech field, this could be a hackathon. For those of you that are a little bit more, academic, this could be trying to get on a peer review panel. And, if you have any questions about any other ideas, like please put them in the question section. How we can help. So as an MPOWER community member, there are resources that are available to you that are not available to anyone else. So we have office hours, which again, we'll send out in a link to everyone. We also, like during those office hours, we do have free consultations. So if you have any friends or anyone who's thinking about starting a company for the O-1, please sign up even in the office hours section, and we can incorporate that consultation into your office hours essentially. We also have a lot of events. So events for networking, just for kind of understanding what entrepreneurship could look like as well. We can facilitate that. And also educational materials. Just if you go on to legalpad.io, our blog has a ton of questions, including FAQ, for all of the updates, which I'll go over briefly after this. You also will receive discounted fees. So as an MPOWER, community member, you actually get 10% off basically the cost of the O-1. What that doesn't include though, and I just want to be really clear here, is the government processing fees. That's not included in the 10% gift discount. And that's because, we don't really have any control over that, how much the government charges. And then additionally, our network. So like I mentioned before, if you need a referral to a PR firm, that's something that we can facilitate with. If you want to join an organization that could, at the very least, like help you network and go like talk to other entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs, that's certainly something that we can help with as well. So yeah, again, if you qualify, you can email us at hello@legalpad.io, but oftentimes it's actually easier to just sign up for office hours, again, with the link that we'll be sending out after this chat. Great, so now here are the key updates for USCIS. This is a little bit more general in nature, so I would encourage you to kind of like sit through and really think about what some of these updates mean for you. So we try to do a good job of making it so that it's easy to understand. It's not so much lawyer talk, but sometimes, being in an industry, we understand these. Sometimes it's just like a difficult kind of beast to untackle, this whole concept of immigration. So don't be afraid to answer questions. Oftentimes people in the industry are struggling to keep up too. So there are no dumb questions at all during this. So key update number one, a lot of you may have heard that USCIS actually was really close to implementing a furlough. And for those of you that don't know, a furlough is essentially where you let go of part of some employees at your company in an effort to save cash for the company. So luckily, USCIS averted a furlough, and it's been averted until September 30th. And luckily, October 1st is the beginning of the government's fiscal year. So, there is a possibility of a future furlough, but because, the next year is starting, we're hoping that the funding actually starts all over again and we can avert it or even get rid of the possibility of it at all. And you can visit our blog at legalpad.io as well, and we'll have updates for you there. Oops. Okay, and then upcoming fee and form changes. So, premium processing timeline will change from 15 calendar days to 15 business days. What does this mean? This means the government, will change effective October 2nd. Usually it takes 2 weeks for them to come up with a final decision, but they have recently announced that it will actually take around 3 weeks for them to come up with a final decision. That's still not bad though, when you consider that the average, processing time for a US work visa is about like 4 to 8 months. And then there's a separate form I-129. I'm not going to go into that too much. You're not here to become immigration experts. This is a little too in the weeds. There will be an increase in filing fees. This is something for those of you who are either starting your companies or are going to be employing other people. Filing fees will be increasing soon, or actually, yeah, effective October 2nd. And then, there are people in government that are advocating for you. So litigation efforts, trying to stop the enforcement of the new changes. And we, if you follow us on social media, we'll definitely keep you updated on what those updates are. Key update number 3. So USCIS, there is something called a public charge rule. So, on the form, it basically asks if you, it asks whether or not you will be using or have ever used public goods as an international person. And usually what they're thinking of are like, if you, let's see, what's a really good example of this? So like, for example, for those of you, like many of my friends who had to go on food stamps after the 2008 crisis, that would be considered a public charge rule. That being said, one other thing, one good thing though too is what's not included in the public charge rule is unemployment. If you collect unemployment, that's not going to be considered public charge, because when you are an employee, you actually pay into that using payroll tax. So not to worry about that piece. Happy to go into this in a little more detail later. Perfect. Plans to toughen up requirements for the H-1B. So this is actually one of the reasons why we've been trying to push the O-1 as much as possible as an option, because a lot of people don't even know that the O-1 exists. But basically, the government has sent a rule that kind of shows their intentions to kind of toughen the requirements, but we don't have all the details yet. So the main parts is that, the definition of what a specialty occupation is, and also what the employer-employee relationship is really what's on the block here. And by employer-employee relationship, what we mean is, that if you are working as a consultant for one of the big four, for example, like BCG, McKinsey, Bain, all of that, they may have stricter requirements in terms of like how your relationship to those firms work. Great. House passed the premium processing bill. So they basically stated that premium processing fee will increase to $2,500 for already eligible categories. But the good news is that it will actually expand to new categories. So if you are applying for an EB-2 national interest waiver, this will allow you to, so that's a green card. This will allow you to premium process the I-140 for that stage. Additionally, if you have an if you need to do a change of status, change or to extend the status to an F visa. So if you are currently working on an H-1B, but you are going back to school, you can change your status to F from inside the US. And also dependents will now be able to take advantage of premium processing, which they have not been able to do before. And another thing which I find the most exciting and probably the most relevant to this audience is if you are submitting a work authorization application, premium processing will be available for that soon too. But this isn't law yet. So the bill needs to be passed by the Senate and signed by the president. Happy to talk through this a little bit more later. Airport restrictions are lifted. So, before there was the travel ban that limited like where people from, like who were flying from Brazil, China, all of the ones listed here, they must only land at 15 designated US airports. So yeah, so before they were closed off to everyone, but now there are 15 airports where people are allowed to fly in. So then COVID-19 travel restrictions are still in place. So if you, apologies, I just realized I made this really confusing. Let me start over. So DHS used to limit the airports where people could fly into that were coming in from these areas into 15 designated airports. They've basically increased the list of airports that people can fly into. However, COVID-19 travel restrictions are still in place. So if you are from any of these areas, there are still travel restrictions. So, if you have been in any of these areas for the last 14 days, you won't be able to enter the US. Yeah, like you won't be able to enter the US without quarantine. Here we go. Oh, additionally, yes, another travel restriction too is that if you have a new H-1B visa, you still won't be able to enter the US until 2021. And here's probably the one that's the most relevant for everyone here. So the DHS announced that if you are a new F1 student, so if you are going to be a freshman or a first year student taking a 100% online course load, you won't be able to get an F1 visa or enter the US. And a lot of this is kind of logistical because consulates are only slowly opening up, and generally it's for emergency services. Existing students, so if you're like a sophomore, second year to final year, you can remain in the US if you were here on March 9th and take a fully online course load. And existing F1 students will be able to enter the US. Another thing though too is that if you are working during OPT and for your STEM OPT, optional practical training, you are not impacted by this, obviously, because you are not required to be taking a university course load. There's an FAQ of the guidance here, which we'll share after the presentation. So for RFEs, if you have a pending application with USCIS, they've basically increased the amount of time for you to respond up to the end of the year, right? Oh yeah, it was like, we'll accept the response 60 calendar days after the response due date. So for the rest of the year, if you receive an RFE, you'll have an additional 60 days for your, like, from your due date. Additionally, USCIS will accept scanned copies of signatures. As I'm sure many of you have dealt with your international student services offices, you usually have to put like a wet signature, meaning using a pen, but they've basically relaxed this requirement for COVID. Travel updates. So if you are here on a visa waiver program, which is basically like a tourist visa, you can apply for something called satisfactory departure if you're not able to go home. So if you're not able to go home because your country is not accepting flights from the US, for example, you can certainly apply for this. The instructions are actually on one of our blog posts, which we'll send out after this. Oops. Yes, consulates reopening. As many of you probably know, consular services were suspended, and on July 15th, there was a phased reopening. That being said, the government hasn't been super clear about, which consulates were going to open and doing which services. So you should read our blog post here, which again, we'll send out afterwards, and check your local embassy/consulate's website for the status. There's another piece as well, like if there is an urgent need to travel to the US, you can contact the consulate themselves to schedule an emergency appointment. The reason why we kind of encourage everyone to contact the consulate, even though it's inconvenient and realistically the wait times are quite long, is because they haven't been super public about what the process is. They're basically adapting as quickly as possible to COVID, and as a result, there is not much documentation out there, nor any kind of like set process for all consulates to follow. So we encourage you to contact the consulate directly. Sorry, I'm gonna drink some water. Great. So another piece too is travel restrictions between Canada and Mexico. So non-essential travel through the borders are like it'll be restricted essentially. But the good news though too is if you're coming into the US to work, that is considered to be essential. So really by non-essential, they mean like for tourism purposes. If you are employed and you're trying to get back to work, then you can certainly re-enter. Yeah, so essential travel, another part of it too is, if you have a green card, you can travel through the borders. If you are traveling for medical purposes too, so to receive medical treatment here, definitely attend educational institutions. This is very relevant for y'all. If you're here to come to school, then yes, you can certainly enter. And then again, for work. This list is also on our blog, which you can find at legalpad.io. Again, so COVID-19 travel ban, I alluded to this earlier, but basically if you have been present in the countries listed below, so essentially like most of Europe in what's considered to be the Schengen area, including the UK and Ireland, and then Brazil, China, and Iran. Basically, if you've been in those countries for 14 days before, you won't be able to enter. Yeah. So the travel ban, again, does not apply to US citizens, green card holders, or spouses of US citizens or green card holders, or basically any dependent of green card holders. And the State Department announced that if you are coming into the US as a business traveler, so on a B1 visa, or if you're a student traveling on F status, and or if you are an E1 or E2 visa holder, you have the ability to apply for national interest, even if you were present in the areas that we listed earlier. And then for the June 22nd presidential proclamation, so, you know, there's an extension of the ban on you know, issuing visas for H-1Bs and certain L-1s and certain J-1 categories, unless you already have a valid visa in your passport. And I cannot emphasize this enough. If you already have a valid visa to enter the US, and that means that the visa sticker in your passport, it's the sticker in your passport, like your physical visa. If it is not expired, then, hold on just a second, then you can enter the US. It's really for people who are looking to get a new visa sticker in their passport that won't be able to enter. And logically speaking, that makes sense simply because consulates aren't even open yet. You need to go to a consulate appointment to get a visa sticker in your passport. And since it's not open, you won't be able to enter. Right. The proclamation does not impact, and we cannot emphasize this enough, people who are already in the US. And if people who are outside the US, again, like I mentioned earlier, who have a valid visa sticker in their passport. This also doesn't affect any applications that you file with USCIS. So if you're doing an H-1B transfer, you're fine. And then green card holders, you know, spouse of a US citizen, all of that stuff. And then an update to this though too is that the national interest argument that we brought up earlier, that's actually been broadened as well. So, you know, if you can basically get a new H-1B or L-1 visa sticker in your passport if you're here to continue employment for the same employer. And also if your employer is integral to kind of like the economic recovery, and that's the national interest. And if you do qualify for any of these areas, then you can request an emergency visa appointment at the consulate. I-9 flexibility, I actually won't go too much into this because this is really more for employers, and I want to actually go to the Q&A section as soon as possible. If you have been laid off, however, on your job, if you are in any of these visa categories, you may remain in the US for up to 60 days until your last date at the company. So the grace period is 60 days, or if your status on your I-94, the expiration date on your I-94, whichever is shorter. And for those of you that are on OPT, on your I-94, it's going to say D/S, which means duration of status. And that expiration date will then be on your I-20. So whatever the expiration date of your current I-20 is, that's the expiration date of your I-94. And then another note is like you can only benefit from 60-day grace period one time per like authorized period. So basically from whenever you got your last extension to the expiration date on your I-94 or your I-120 or I-20. And then within the 60-day grace period, you will need to file a change of employer or a change of status, which is, you know, basically like if you have an H-1B, you need to file that transfer during that 60 days. So if you basically have 60 days to look for a job and then get that employer to submit a change of employer or change of status. Otherwise, you'll need to plan to depart the US. All right, questions, no charge. I know I blew through a lot of information and I was still over time by 10 minutes, but I want to take the time to answer any questions that come up.
Thank you so much, Sara, for this presentation. I think in the meantime, we actually got quite a number of questions, and I've been assigning it to
I'm sure
everyone out there as well. I think the first few questions I assigned to Jeet. Do you want to take those up?
Sure, Baz. Yeah. So thank you so much, Sara. Definitely, that was a great session and a lot to cover as well, for sure. But the question we have is, can we start our own business while being on an F1 visa? So yes, you can incorporate your business in the United States while you are on your F1 status. But the leeway is that you won't be able to engage in your day-to-day activity for your business, or you won't be able to generate revenue from your business on F1 visa. To do that, you need to have specific work authorization, and specific work authorization means you need to have an OPT or CPT specifically authorized for your startup while you are in school, and after school you can explore other visa options such as H1B or O-1 for your own startup. But yeah, you can incorporate a business in the United States on F1 visa, but to work on it and to basically engage in day-to-day activity to your business, you need to have work authorization. But if you are not able to get work authorization while you are on F1 visa, then what you could do is you could assign someone as a CEO of your company who has work authorization in the United States, and they could run the company on behalf of you. But yeah.
And to be clear, by work authorization generally for students, it's the I-765, so the EAD document, the EAD card.
Yep. Yeah. So when you apply for OPT, you get EAD card, or if you are still in school, and then you can also use your CPT that you get as a curriculum practical training that should be associated with your field of study though. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeet, for that question. I think there was another question, or have you already?
If you could spell it out, that would be great, because I don't see myself here.
Okay, great. So the other question that we had was, I mean, does the person needs to be in the US, and is it different for, I mean, for anybody to apply for O-1 visa, does the person have to be in the US? And how is it different from an F1 visa for students? I think you already covered that, Sara, but maybe just to specifically point that out.
Yeah. So could you repeat the first part of the question, Arbaz?
In order to apply for an O-1 visa, does the person have to be in the US?
Right. Perfect. So you do not have to be in the US, but you will need to, like practically speaking though, in order to enter the US on the new O-1 visa, you will need to have a visa sticker in your passport. Which you're not subject to the travel ban, which is also the other benefit of having the O-1 visa. But getting a visa sticker is going to be tricky right now, just because the consulates aren't like taking appointments unless it's an emergency appointment.
Okay, got it.
Oh, and then the second part, the O-1 versus the F1. So the F1, actually, you are entitled to F1 work authorization generally. after you graduate from university. And the application process for that actually is, pretty straightforward, and that's something that your university can help you with. The O-1, the problem with the F1 visa though is that you only have up to 3 years of work authorization, and then you will need to find another visa type to be on after that. And the 3 years only applies if you're a STEM major. But with the O-1, you qualify for 3 years. It's super flexible, and you can start your own company with the O-1 as well. Whereas the F1, you certainly can, but there are workarounds that need to be put in place in order to do that. And also for the O-1, you can go work for other companies and you can extend it indefinitely. We just find that it just gives you a lot more flexibility. And additionally, it tends to be exempt from a lot of the travel bans and new immigration and travel policies that are happening during COVID.
Understood. Got it.
I have 2 questions, Sara.
Yes.
So, with the current delay in processing time, what's the expected turnaround time from when all applications are ready for the O-1 visa and submitted to when you get an actual visa?
So that really depends. I kind of just want to outline something really briefly in immigration. So there's a distinction between your visa status and the visa sticker in your passport. So you need to consider those 2 logistics there. So once we, submit the O-1 application to the US government, if you opt for premium processing, we'll get a response from them within 15 business days, so like 3 weeks from the government. That being said, if you apply for a change of status, so basically you tick off 1 box on that form that says that you're changing from F1, for example, to O-1, then you should be fine and you have O-1 status right away. And your new I-94 will actually be on your approval notice. It will no longer be electronic. That being said, if you are outside of the US and you're applying for the O-1, again, you kind of run into the issue of getting a visa appointment and getting that visa sticker in your passport. And an easy way to kind of think about this is, you could have your visa status and not have a visa sticker in your passport because you changed your status in the US. But if you're outside of the US and you don't have a visa sticker in your passport, you need to think of it like it's a plane ticket. Like you can show up to the terminal, but like once you they're going to check to see if you have that ticket to board the plane. And if you don't have it, then you won't be able to come into the US, even if you have an approval.
And then the second question. So you spoke to us about, what happens if you get laid off when you have the H-1B, the EB-1 visas and all that. For students, right? What happens if I'm on an OPT work permit, work document, and due to COVID, my offer gets rescinded?
Oh my gosh, yeah. No, this is tricky. And I definitely sympathize with you on that. So if you could repeat the first part, so this person has a valid work visa?
Yes, the OPT visa for 1 year,
Right.
And then due to COVID, the offer letter got rescinded.
Yes, so you're allowed to have, if you're on first-time OPT, I believe, is it, Jeet, maybe correct me on this, is it 60 days or 90 days of unemployment?
90 days, yeah. So you can stay unemployed for 90 days.
Right, and I would encourage you to just look for a job during that time, so that way you stay compliant with not just USCIS, which is in charge of immigration in the US, but also with CVIS, which is the Student Information System, because your university will be keeping track of that because they're actually being put under a watchful eye right now.
And Sara, is there a particular duration? I think you already mentioned that one can indefinitely extend the O-1 visa as well. But when the person gets it for the first time, is there a particular duration that which is allotted with the O-1 visa?
So it is for 3 years, but it's for 3 years with a lot more flexibility, to be clear.
Understood.
Yeah, and even if you're on an F1, you know, this isn't just about the O-1, right? Like if you're on an F1, like you should always encourage your employer to put your name in the H-1B lottery every year. Just because, you know, like it is a lottery and there's a chance that you don't get it. So for every time that you're employed in the US, every year, you should encourage your employer to basically put your name in the hat. And the government has made it a lot easier for employers to do that, because before you would have to get a lawyer and submit an entire petition and then hope you got into the lottery. But in recent years, what's happened is your employer just needs to pay $10 to put your name in the running, and then they can get a lawyer and put together your petition once they found out you already got through the lottery. So if you, maybe this could be a webinar for another time, but just kind of like how to position your immigration status to potential employers. Like it's a lot easier than they probably think.
Okay, that's pretty interesting insight. Yeah, I mean, didn't really know that. And
yeah,
are there any?
Very helpful. Yep, very helpful. Because recently we're hearing from employers, you know, that a lot of them are shying away from sponsoring the H-1B visa due to all the changes. So I guess as international students, if we're able to equip ourselves with that information and have the ability to propose, you know, why it's easier now, why they can take on that challenge, then we should be able to make a business case for it during the interviewing process, especially.
Oh, yes, absolutely. This might be a topic for a webinar for another time, but there are some tips that a lot of you recent grads in particular should consider when looking for an employer. I know that during this crisis, there's a tendency to kind of just, you know, like take whatever job that you can get, but I strongly encourage you all, extremely talented people, to kind of keep a few things in mind before you take a job offer as well.
Okay. Coming back to the O-1 visa specifically, does it come with any sort of a travel restrictions for outside US, maybe visiting?
Yeah, so the O-1 is actually the most flexible out of all of the all of the work visas, so not green cards. Because green cards, travel is pretty much like you're able to travel like a US citizen if you have a green card already. But for the O-1, that's the one that's the most flexible to travel to. Whereas for the F1, it's kind of dependent on like your school and whether or not your school is 100% online, all of that stuff, right?
Got it. And are there any specific industry areas for eligibility for an O-1, or it applies to any sort of an industry or any sort of a, I don't know, maybe function or anything at all in that case?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, because, you know, the H-1B, which I think gets the most airtime in the press, that requires, you know, industry specific, you know, basically occupation codes that you have to put on the application. But for the O-1, there isn't anything like that. What you do need to do, though, is to prove that you are excellent in your field. So, you know, it's not enough for you to get like a general award for being a good person, although I wish they had that, because we need that more than ever now. It's about like what your contribution to that industry is. But you have the flexibility to kind of define what that is. It's like a little more, the government doesn't have like a strict box that you have to fill. So for example, tech entrepreneurship, that's one that we pretty much pioneered as an industry, the definition of an industry.
And I see this question being repeated a number of times actually. Could you just, re-specify, does it apply only for the founders or maybe an early stage employee as well with an equity stake?
Yes. So it is best for founders, but there is an ability to do it for early stage employees. And particularly if that early stage employee was a part of the fundraising process. That is, yeah, so, you know, if you have an employee, let's say this is something that we see very often, like the first engineer at your company, we could make a very good case for their qualifications for the O-1 because let's say a venture fund invested in your company because of the work that that person did.
Got it. Just, I think another question that I see quite often in the list is the timing to apply for an O-1 visa. From a typical international student who, let's say, goes on an F1 and then starts with their OPT, what is the right time to start the process for an O-1 visa? Is it by the time they finish, they're finishing it with their O-1 or with their OPT, or is it, you know, pretty much early on so they have ample cushion time for the proceedings?
So I hesitate to kind of give a directive on this because it really depends on the situation. Because, and also just to be clear, like nothing that we're saying here should be constituted as legal advice. We're just giving you information. So if you are on OPT and you want to transition to an O-1, it's usually a good idea to do it before your OPT expires. Just because, you know, if anything does happen, like premium processing is taken away and all of that stuff, like you want to make sure that you're as prepared as possible, right? That being said, there are a lot of moving parts in place though too. When are you going to be receiving fundraising? Is the case going to be better after a certain date because you'll have all of this evidence? And there's also some practical things as well, like you know, if you're on STEM OPT, like we need to kind of talk about whether or not you could recapture that time if for some reason the O-1 doesn't work out. So it really, really depends.
Okay. And a follow-up to that was that I think you did mention that one can apply for an O-1 visa from their home country as well, right? So is that process difficult in your experience, or it's pretty much still the same in terms of difficulty and complications?
So you will still need to apply. So you can be in your home country and submit an application to USCIS, which means you'll still need to pay the government fees. It will need to be sent to an office that is in the US. And you'll need to wait for the approval notice. And then, you know, again, just going back to the consulate issue, if you do get that approval notice, you need to call your consulate and let them know, like ask them if they're taking appointments for O-1 visa sticker interviews, right? You've already been approved by USCIS, which is under Department of Homeland Security, but you now need to be approved by Department of State, which are the people who issue that visa sticker in your passport. Yeah, it's kind of a two-step process there. And additionally, you know, if you are already on an O-1 or an H-1B, for example, and you're just going back to the country to work for your employer again, then you can schedule an emergency meeting. But if this is a new visa for you, then you are not, like, that's going to be a bit of a trickier case to make.
Got it. And how is the case for any dependence on O-1 visa? I mean, is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is a really good question. So dependents of O-1 visas are not allowed to work in the US. We've tried every which way to kind of figure out how to make it happen, but unfortunately, it's pretty ironclad. If you are on an O3 visa, which is the dependent visa, you won't be able to get an I-765 or an EAD card. However, you know, your dependent, who are like your spouse, for example, or if you have a dependent child who, you know, is over a certain age, I believe it's like 18 or 21, it really depends. Then they may be able to apply for a different visa on their own, definitely at least 18 then. However, yeah, you need to apply for a whole separate visa for them and all of that stuff. And yeah.
Okay. And does the O-1 visa apply to only apply for maybe for-profit organizations, and can it also encompass social enterprises or NGOs?
So it can definitely encompass social enterprises and NGOs. That being said, that social enterprise or NGO will need to have received something that's kind of like venture funding, right? From an established organization that does a lot of vetting, and only few organizations get funding from them. So potentially the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that could be considered an award. But yeah, it just still, your position would still need to fit into the 8 criterion that we listed earlier.
Got it. So I think, Sara, we're out of time and we still have a bunch of questions left. Would it make sense if we list all of them down, and maybe you and your team can decide which of them could be answered, and we can compile a document and send across to all the attendees?
Oh, absolutely. And we'll also take some of your feedback and basically post it online as well, so you can send it to your friends. We just want to make sure all this information gets out there. And that link to office hours, certainly please take advantage of it.
So just for everyone to know, we would be sharing answers to the questions that haven't been addressed here in a document. And yes, there have been questions about how can LegalPad help in O-1 visa. So I just wanted you to cover that once, and maybe share the link in the chat as well with everyone before we end this session. So
yes, absolutely. Another thing though too is that LegalPad does do other events as well. The immigration updates piece in particular, which could be helpful. I'll put that in the chat too. Jeet, can you put the information for the O-1? And basically we have the immigration updates webinar. Is it every 2 weeks, Jeet, now?
Yeah, every other week. Yeah.
Perfect. Every other week. And you can basically sign up there and just like learn more about that. We also have O-1 webinar info sessions during that time.
Yeah, so I'm putting it in chat box for you, or Baz. You can share it with the whole group. Yeah. So this first link that I'm sending is about the events that LegalPad hosts. Basically, it's webinars. So we have different type of webinar for different audiences. So we have webinar about EB2 green card visa as well. And then there are O-1 visa webinars. Then there is immigration updates, and then there are student webinar as well, specifically curated for students. And yeah, sorry, Sarah.
Oh yeah, and again, like the more questions that you ask us or put in the chat box, the more it helps us kind of be as useful to you guys as possible. So seriously, there's no such thing as a dumb question. People who have worked in this industry for years are trying to understand what's going on too. So don't be afraid.
Yep, for sure. Like what we do is basically when we get some questions, we usually try to curate our webinars as well according to those questions. So the most important information to you guys gets out there. And
yes, got it. I got the other link as well.
Yeah, so that is to book office hours. So basically when you there is a form on there, and when you register for that form, basically you will get an email from one of our team members to book a meeting with them.
Sent to everyone. So guys, there's a link in your chat. Please feel free to use that. We will also include that in the follow-up email that we'll send out with the document and with the recording of the webinar. So keep an eye out for that. And before we end up, I just want to thank all 3 of you to be with us here today. It's been really a pleasure hosting you guys, and to all the attendees that we had. Really thank you for taking time out on a busy Saturday, maybe a slow weekend, a Saturday morning, not an easy thing to come on. Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you have fun. I hope you have a good session. Any last words, guys?
Yeah, thank you so much to you, Arbaz, for hosting a great session.
Yes.
It was definitely helpful for everyone.
Well, and thank you for everyone who showed up. I mean, I remember when I was a student or a recent grad, the last thing I wanted to do was wake up early on a Saturday morning. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for showing up.
Well, goodbye, everyone. Have a really nice weekend, and
Yep.
all the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.